Josie Calloway used to have a very simple list of problems. Her espresso machine leaked, her landlord was a ghost who only communicated through threatening notes, and she was hopelessly single. Then the world ended, and her problems got a full upgrade. Now she's stuck in a boarded-up hardware store with a ragtag group of survivors, a rotating cast of the Undead trying to get in, and Sam Whitfield, the infuriatingly calm, infuriatingly attractive former personal trainer, who keeps saving her life like it's a mild inconvenience to him. Welcome to Flustered novel, where love is chaotic, confessions are awkward, and every story comes with butterflies, drama, and a little emotional damage. Grab a snack, get comfortable, and let's dive into today's romance story. Here is a fact nobody tells you about the apocalypse. It is deeply, aggressively unglamorous. Nobody warns you that your last full meal before civilization collapses will be a gas station burrito, or that you will spend the first 3 days of the outbreak not fighting zombies, but arguing with a stranger about whether it's raccoons, or the apocalypse, making that noise in the walls. For the record, it was the apocalypse. It is always the apocalypse. Now I live in a hardware store. Not above a hardware store, not near a hardware store. Inside one, behind a barricade made of paint cans and good intentions, with 4 other people who were strangers to me before the world ended and who are now, against every instinct I have, my family. There's Dana, my best friend, who has strong opinions about defensible architecture, and an alarming amount of knowledge about medieval siege warfare. There's Walt, 60-something, retired, allegedly a locksmith, definitely the only person here who knows how to make the generator stop screaming. There's Milo, 17, feral, endlessly hungry, obsessed with a comic book he's read approximately 400 times since the world ended because there's nothing else to read. And then there's Sam. Sam Whitfield was a personal trainer before this. I know that because he told me unprompted on day 2, while carrying a dresser over one shoulder to block a window, like it was a normal thing a man does while chatting. He has since spent every day since being aggravatingly, relentlessly good at surviving. He is calm when things are on fire. He is calm when things are attacking us. He was calm one memorable afternoon, while I stood on a table screaming about a rat, and he just looked at me with this small, maddening smile like I was the most entertaining thing he'd seen all week. I would like it on record that I do not have feelings about Sam. I have feelings about the fact that the world ended. Those are separate feelings, located in entirely different parts of my chest, and I intend to keep it that way for as long as humanly possible. This is the story of how that plan fell apart. It started, as far as I can tell, with a cough. Not my cough. Not a symbolic cough. An actual, specific cough belonging to a man in line ahead of me at the fast stop on Route 9, 3 days before everything went sideways. He coughed, apologized, bought a lottery ticket, and left. I remember thinking mildly that he looked a little gray. I remember thinking this the way you think about a stranger's weird haircut. A fact you notice and then immediately discard. 2 days later half the town had that cough. 1 day after that, the coughing stopped being the problem. I was at work when it happened, work being the grind, the coffee shop where I had spent 4 years perfecting the art of looking busy while a machine did all the actual labor. My coworker Priya went to take her break, and didn't come back. Then there was screaming from the parking lot, the kind of screaming that rearranges something permanently in your chest. And then there was a man in a very nice suit trying to eat my regular customer Gary. And I want it noted that I did not hesitate. I threw a full carafe of drip coffee at his head, grabbed my keys, and left through the back door so fast I left one shoe behind. I have never seen that shoe again. I think about it sometimes. Here is where Sam enters the story, although I didn't know his name yet. I only knew him as the extremely large man blocking my car. He was standing in the middle of the parking lot with a tire iron in one hand, and an expression of profound, weary calm, like he had budgeted exactly this much chaos into his Tuesday. There were 2 of them between him and a beat-up truck, and he was handling it with the mild irritation of someone dealing with a jammed printer. "Get in your car," he said, without looking at me. "That's my car," I said, gesturing at the sedan he was standing next to, because apparently in a life-or-death situation my brain's top priority is real estate disputes. "Not that one. Mine. Now." He swung the tire iron with an economy of motion I would later learn was very much his whole personality, and one of them went down. "Unless you'd rather walk." I got in his truck. I would like the record to reflect that I made this decision purely on tactical grounds and not because he had forearms like that, but I am telling this story honestly, and honesty compels me to admit the forearms were a factor. His name, I learned somewhere around mile 3, driving in a direction that was mostly away, was Sam. He'd been at the gym next to the grind when things went bad. A personal trainer, mid-session with a client who tragically had not survived the transition from cardio to the literal apocalypse. He said this so flatly that I laughed before I could stop myself, a horrible, inappropriate bark of a laugh, and he glanced at me sideways like he was recalibrating his opinion of me in real time. Sorry, I said. That was an insane thing to laugh at. It's fine, he said. Better than crying. I've been trying not to do the math on how many people I know are okay right now, because the math is bad, and I need to drive. I did not have a witty response to that. I looked out the window instead, at a town that used to be normal and now had a bus on fire in the middle of Main Street, and I thought with total clarity, this is not a bad dream I am going to wake up from. This is just where we live now. We drove until the truck ran low on gas, and the roads got too clogged with abandoned cars to keep moving, and that's how we ended up on foot outside a hardware store with a busted front window, and a sign that said all seasonal items 40% off, which felt, under the circumstances, like a joke the universe was playing specifically on me. In here, Sam said. Why a hardware store? He looked at me like the answer was obvious, which to be fair it kind of was. Locks, boards, tools, weapons if it comes to that. And it's not a grocery store, so it's not the first place people will loot. He paused at the shattered window, listening, that same eerie calm settling over his face like a mask he'd practiced putting on. Stay behind me. I want to tell you I said something clever here. I did not. I said, okay, in a small voice and followed a total stranger into a dark hardware store, because it was that or die in a parking lot, and something about the set of his shoulders made me trust him more than I trusted anyone else currently available, which granted was nobody. We found Dana in the plumbing aisle, wielding a pipe wrench and absolutely feral with fear. 20 minutes later, we found Walt in the back office, calmly eating a granola bar he'd looted from the break room. 20 minutes after that, informing us with great authority that he used to be a locksmith and this was, structurally, a very defensible building. We found Milo hiding in the paint mixing machine, which is a detail I will let stand entirely on its own. By nightfall there were 5 of us, one busted window boarded over with plywood, and a very long, very quiet conversation about whether we were staying here for the night or the foreseeable future. We stayed. We're still here. And somewhere in the 6 hours between the gas station and the granola bar and the plywood, I had already, without my permission, started noticing things about Sam Whitfield that had nothing to do with survival at all. Week 1 taught me the following facts about post-apocalyptic cohabitation, presented here in the order I learned them, which is also roughly the order of how annoying they were. 1. You cannot sleep on a display mattress in the furniture aisle, because display mattresses are somehow both extremely firm and extremely fake, like sleeping on a rumor of comfort. Dana tried it for 2 nights before giving up and dragging a stack of moving blankets into the break room instead. 2. Walt snores like there's a small, contented bear living in his sinuses, and there is nothing to be done about this except accept it as a form of white noise. 3. Milo will eat anything that was at some point food adjacent, including but not limited to 3 entire boxes of decorative birthday candles, which he described afterward as not great but not nothing. 4. And this is the one that actually mattered. Sam Whitfield does not know how to relax, in any capacity, ever. I first noticed this on day 3, when I woke up at 2 in the morning to get water, and found him sitting by the boarded window with a crowbar across his knees, perfectly still, listening to the dark. I asked him if he'd slept at all. He said some. In a tone that made it extremely clear the answer was no. I sat down next to him, because I am incapable of leaving well enough alone, and we ended up talking until the sky started going gray at the edges, about nothing important. His sister, who he hoped was somewhere safe with her kids, my mother 3 states away, who I hadn't been able to reach and had decided, as a coping mechanism, to simply not think about until I absolutely had to. He told me about the gym he used to run, a little strip mall place that smelled like rubber mats and ambition. I told him about the Pinterest board for my bathroom renovation, and he laughed, actually laughed, a real one, surprised out of him, and said that was, and I quote, the single most normal thing anyone has said to me in 4 days. That became a thing we did. Not every night, but enough nights that Dana started giving me a look over her coffee. Instant, terrible, hoarded coffee, rationed like currency. A look that said she had opinions and was choosing, generously, not to share them yet. It would be a lie to say nothing was happening. Something was very obviously happening. It just happened slowly, the way trust does when you're forced to depend on someone for your literal survival. Layered under 100 small moments that on their own meant nothing and stacked together meant something enormous. He learned that I hate cilantro and started picking it out of the canned soup before I ate it. I learned that he checks every lock twice, not because he doesn't trust the first check, but because his hands need something to do while his brain runs through worst-case scenarios. He carried an extra firewood without being asked. I organized For my part, my reason was simple. The world had ended, my life was on fire, both literally and figuratively, and it seemed deeply inappropriate to develop a crush on a man whose primary qualification was good at killing zombies with a tire iron. I told myself this was not the time. I told myself this a lot, actually, usually right after he did something unfairly charming, like the time he spent 45 minutes teaching Milo how to throw a proper punch, and then completely deadpan, told the kid his form was better than most of my old clients, and they were paying me $120 an hour, so, you're welcome. It was week 3. Supplies were fine. The hardware store had a back stockroom full of canned goods some previous, more paranoid owner had apparently been hoarding, which Walt discovered while looking for washers and treated as a religious experience. But morale was getting thin, the way it does when every day looks exactly like the last one, just with more boarding on the windows and more distant screaming outside. Dana had the idea that we picked a color. This should not have been complicated. It was somehow extremely complicated, because Milo wanted dead guy green as a joke, Walt wanted beige because Walt is spiritually a beige man, and Dana and I got into a genuinely heated argument about sage versus eucalyptus. Two colors that are, and I will die on this hill, meaningfully different. Sam wisely stayed out of it until asked to operate the paint mixer, at which point he became, unexpectedly, extremely invested, treating the machine like a piece of gym equipment he needed to master. This was how I ended up alone with him in the back storage room at 9 at night, both of us covered in flecks of eucalyptus. I won obviously, laughing so hard about Walt's beige-related outrage that I had actual tears in my eyes, the good kind, the kind I hadn't cried in weeks. He reached over to wipe a smear of paint off my cheek. It was a small thing. It should have been a small thing. His thumb grazed my jaw and every single thought I'd been having for 3 weeks. The ignore it, don't name it, wrong time, wrong world thoughts, arrived at once, all together, like a traffic jam of bad decisions. We both went very still. You've got paint, he said, which was not what either of us were thinking about. Thanks, I said, in a voice that came out about an octave higher than intended. He didn't move his hand. I didn't move away. The storage room was small and dim and smelled like sawdust and eucalyptus paint, and for one entire suspended second, I genuinely believed something was about to happen, something I had been simultaneously dreading and hoping for since a truck ride and a tire iron 3 weeks ago. Then the door banged open and Milo announced at top volume that he'd found a raccoon in the ceiling tiles, and Sam's hand dropped, and the moment folded itself up and put itself away like it had never happened at all. We did not discuss it. We painted the break room. It looked, everyone agreed, extremely calming, which felt like a joke the universe was making at my expense, because I personally did not feel calm at all. I felt like a woman who had almost gotten to find out something extremely important, and had instead gotten a raccoon. Dana cornered me in the bathroom that night, arms crossed, coffee in hand, and said without preamble, "So, you and Sam." "There is no me and Sam," I said, with the confidence of someone who had just spent an hour lying face down on a moving blanket thinking exclusively about Sam. She said. "The raccoon has better timing than any human being currently alive, is all I'm saying." I told her to go to bed. She went to bed, still smug, which I found deeply unfair, given that she was not the one who had almost gotten paint-adjacent feelings confessed to her by a very attractive man before a raccoon ruined everything. I lay awake a long time that night, thinking about his thumb on my jaw, and hating quietly and completely every single raccoon in the tri-state area. Supply runs were, by unspoken agreement, a 2-person job. Enough hands to carry things, enough eyes to watch each other's backs, few enough bodies to move quietly. By week 5, the pairing had settled without anyone officially deciding it, into Sam and me. Dana said this was obviously strategic. Walt's, the pharmacy 3 blocks over was the objective. Milo had a fever that wouldn't break, and Walt's blood pressure medication was down to its last handful of pills, and neither of those were things we could afford to be casual about. Sam and I left at dawn, when the streets were quietest, moving the way we'd learned to move, close together, silent, reading each other's small signals instead of talking, a language that had built itself between us out of necessity and had somehow become, without my permission, one of my favorite things about my entire life. The pharmacy was mostly picked over, but mostly isn't the same as entirely, and we found what we needed in the back behind a fallen shelf, which was also where we found them, 3 of them, slow, shuffling, drawn by the noise of the shelf going over. Sam took 2. I took 1, with the aluminum bat I'd started carrying, a bat I had privately named Carol, for reasons that made sense only to me and possibly to Milo, who thought it was the funniest thing he'd ever heard and had taken to yelling, "Get Carol," during every subsequent supply run, which was, I maintain, extremely supportive of him. It went fine. It went, in fact, well, right up until the moment a fourth one came around the corner behind Sam while he was still finishing off the second. And I did something I have relived roughly 4,000 times since. I didn't call out a warning. I moved. I don't remember deciding to. I remember Carol connecting with a very satisfying, very final thud. And I remember Sam turning around afterward, breathing hard, staring at me like he was seeing something for the first time. "You could have called out," he said. "I had it." "You didn't see it," I said. "I wasn't going to stand there and watch and see if you noticed in time." "Josie, I'm not having the argument where you tell me I shouldn't have done that," I said, because I could feel one coming, the overprotective kind, and I was not, 6 weeks into an apocalypse, going to be told to stand back and watch. I'd do it again. I did not have a response to that. We finished loading the bag in silence, not an uncomfortable silence, but a loud one, full of things neither of us was saying, and walked home close enough that our hands kept brushing, neither of us moving away, both of us apparently agreeing without a single word to pretend that wasn't happening either. Milo's fever broke that night. Walt got his pills. And I lay on my moving blanket afterward, turning one sentence over and over in my head. That's what scares me, trying to decide whether I was allowed to be as happy about it as I was. By week 7, Dana had run out of patience, which in retrospect was inevitable, because Dana has approximately the patience of a lit fuse on her best day, and watching Sam and me dance around each other for 7 weeks had apparently used up whatever reserve she'd had left. The intervention, and I use that word because that is genuinely what it was, took place in the paint aisle, ambush style, while Sam was outside with Walt checking the perimeter and Milo was occupied with the comic book he had, by this point, essentially memorized. "Sit," Dana said, gesturing to an overturned bucket like it was a therapy chair. "We're talking about it." "About what?" "Josie." "You almost died for him last week and didn't even flinch," she said, ticking things off on her fingers with the merciless efficiency of a woman building a legal case. "You reorganized his socks by usefulness, which is a category you invented. You laugh at his jokes even when they're bad, and I have heard his jokes, Josie. They are, objectively, not good. And 3 nights ago I got up to pee and found the two of you sitting by the window at 4 in the morning, not even talking, just sitting there. Together. Looking extremely cozy about the end of the world. We were on watch. You are always somehow both on watch." I opened my mouth to argue and found, humiliatingly, that I didn't have one. Dana watched this realization land on my face with the satisfaction of a woman who had known she was right the entire time. "Here's my professional opinion," she said. "As your best friend and also the only person here who still has the emotional bandwidth to care about somebody else's love life instead of just my own survival. The world ending doesn't mean you have to stop being a person who wants things. If anything, it means the opposite. We could die literally any day, Josie. Any day. And you're going to spend whatever time you have left pretending you don't have a crush on the human tank who fights zombies for us, and also learned you don't like cilantro." "It's complicated," I said, which was a lie, because it was not complicated at all. It was extremely simple. I was just being a coward about it. "It's not complicated. You like him. He clearly, and I mean clearly, Josie, likes you back. The man looks at you like you personally hung the moon. And I don't even think he knows he's doing it. And the only thing standing in the way is you deciding the apocalypse is a bad time for happiness, which, I would like to point out, is an insane thing to decide, because when exactly were you planning on being happy? After? There might not be an after. There's just now. Use it." I didn't say anything for a long moment. Outside, faintly, I could hear Sam's voice, low and even, saying something to Walt that made Walt laugh, that big wheezing bear snore laugh, and something in my chest ached with a feeling I recognized, reluctantly, as wanting. "Okay," I said finally. "Okay. You're right. I like him. A lot. Possibly an unreasonable amount, given we've known each other for 7 weeks and most of that time has been spent surviving a mutual threat of violent death." "That's the most romantic thing I've ever heard," Dana said, deeply unbothered by the caveat. "So what are you going to do about it?" I did not, as it turned out, get to answer that question, because that was the exact moment the back door slammed open and Walt's voice came through, sharp and urgent in a way I had never heard from him before, saying 2 words that ended the conversation entirely and started, instead, the worst night of the entire apocalypse so far. "They're in." I have relived that night enough times that I could describe it in my sleep, which, unfortunately, I sometimes still do. A section of the backloading dock we'd considered secure had not been secure, a rusted latch finally giving way under weeks of pressure, and a small horde, maybe 8 or 9 of them, drawn by God knows what, had shoved through into the stockroom while Dana and I were mid-conversation about my feelings, blissfully unaware that our fortress had a hole in it. What followed was loud and fast, and the kind of frightening that doesn't leave room for thought, only reaction. Walt got the office door barricaded with Milo behind it, over Milo's furious protests. Dana and I fell back into the main store, putting shelving between us and them, buying seconds that felt like currency we didn't have enough of. And Sam went the other way, toward the stockroom, toward them, because the loading dock led, if you took a hard left, straight to the stairwell up to the room where we kept our water supply, our first aid kit, and not incidentally Milo, if the office door gave. I did not decide to follow him. My legs simply did it without consulting the rest of me. Josie, no. Dana grabbed for my arm and missed. I found Sam holding the stockroom doorway alone, 3 of them already down at his feet, 2 more coming, moving with the particular determined shuffle of things that don't get tired and don't stop. And something in me that had spent 7 weeks being careful, being reasonable, waiting for a better time, simply switched off. I swung Carol into the nearest one with everything I had. Sam took the other. For a handful of seconds it was just the 2 of us, back to back in a narrow doorway, moving like we'd rehearsed it, like we'd been doing this together for years instead of weeks. And even in the middle of genuine terror some small, insane part of my brain thought, this is the most in sync we have ever been. And I am furious that it's happening while we might die. It ended. It always ends, eventually, in this life. The noise stops, the door gets barricaded, the adrenaline drains out of you all at once, and leaves you shaking on the floor of a hardware store surrounded by things you don't want to look at too closely. Sam sank down against the wall across from me, breathing hard, blood on his sleeve that turned out, thank God, to be someone else's and not his. You weren't supposed to follow me, he said, when he could talk again. You weren't supposed to go alone, I said back, my voice cracking in a way I hated. Josie. He said my name like it cost him something. If something happened to you because you came after me, then it happened because I chose it, I said. Same as you choosing to go toward the thing that could have killed you to protect Milo. You don't get to be the only reckless one, Sam. That's not how this works. Not with us. He looked at me for a long silent moment, and something in his expression finally cracked open. The calm mask he wore for everyone, all the time, the one I'd started to think was just who he was, slipping to show something underneath that looked a lot like fear, and under the fear, something else. Something that had been there, I realized, since the parking lot, since the truck, since the tire iron. I can't, he started and stopped, and dragged a hand down his face. I can't lose anyone else. I've already my sister, I don't know if she's, he didn't finish it. He didn't have to. And somewhere in the last 7 weeks you turned into someone I genuinely do not know how to survive losing. And I don't know what to do with that, because this is the worst possible time, and the worst possible place, and I keep telling myself that, and it keeps not mattering. I crossed the small space between us before I'd fully decided to. Dana gave me a whole speech today, I said, about how there might not be an after, about how this is just now, and I should stop waiting for a better time to be happy. Dana's smarter than all of us, Sam said, a little unsteady. She really is. I reached out, the way he had that night with the paint, and touched his jaw, thumb against 3 weeks of stubble he never quite had time to shave. I've been waiting for a better time too. I don't think it's coming. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He reached up, covered my hand with his, and for the first time in 7 weeks, 7 impossible, terrifying, unexpectedly wonderful weeks, neither of us pulled away. And no raccoon, no fever, no shelf full of paint cans, and no horde of the actual undead showed up to stop what happened next. I will spare you the details. I will say only that it was, by every possible metric, worth the wait, and that Dana, when she found us 20 minutes later still sitting in that stockroom doorway with our foreheads pressed together, simply looked at the ceiling and said, finally, with the weary triumph of a woman who had called it from day one. I want to be honest about something. The 2 weeks after that night were, against all odds and all logic, some of the best of my entire life, apocalypse very much included. This is not to say the apocalypse got easier. The apocalypse remained, at all times, extremely apocalyptic. But there is a specific kind of joy available only to people who have already survived the worst version of a thing and come out the other side holding hands. And Sam and I had that joy in genuinely embarrassing abundance. He started leaving the good granola bars, the peanut butter ones, The ones Milo would fight you for, on my side of the shelf without a word. I started saving him the least burnt piece of whatever Walt cooked, which was a real sacrifice, because Walt's cooking ran on a scale from burnt to aggressively burnt, and I had genuinely come to love him anyway. We took watch shifts together that involved significantly less watching and significantly more quiet, stolen conversation than either of us would admit to Dana, who knew anyway, because Dana knows everything, and made sure we were aware that she knew, constantly, with maximum smugness. Milo, for his part, adjusted to the new arrangement by treating it as an opportunity for relentless commentary. He took to announcing, at full volume and maximum inconvenience, "Oh, are you two being gross again?" Anytime Sam so much as handed me a water bottle, until Sam threatened, with total sincerity, to make him do burpees, at which point Milo discovered a newfound respect for other people's privacy. Walt, surprisingly, was the one who got sentimental about it. He cornered me by the paint mixer one evening. Everyone, I was learning, liked to corner me by the paint mixer. It had apparently become our designated feelings location, and told me gruffly without much preamble, that he'd been married 41 years before his wife passed, 3 years before any of this started, and that watching Sam and me find each other in the middle of the worst thing that had ever happened to any of us had put something back that I figured was gone for good. I did not know what to do with that information except hug him, which he tolerated for exactly 4 seconds before declaring it, enough of that, and changing the subject to generator maintenance. I would like to tell you it stayed simple. It did not stay simple because nothing in this life stays simple, and because I am, by nature, someone who cannot leave a good thing alone without poking at it to make sure it's real. It started small. A scavenging trip that went slightly wrong, nothing catastrophic, just a close call, the kind we'd had a dozen times, except this time Sam grabbed my arm and hauled me back from a falling shelf so hard I bruised, and afterward he was quiet in a way that wasn't his usual calm. It was something tighter. Something scared. "You're allowed to be scared," I told him that night when he still hadn't said much. "You don't have to be the unbothered one all the time. Not with me." "I don't know how to do the other thing," he admitted, low, like it cost him. "I've spent my whole life being the guy who doesn't panic. My dad left when I was 12 and somebody had to hold it together for my sister, and it turned out to be me, and I've just kept doing that. Being the calm one. It's the only setting I've got." "That's not a setting," I said. "That's a habit. And it's a good one most of the time, but it means when something actually scares you, you don't tell anyone. You just get quieter and further away. And I need you to not do that with me. I need the scared version too, not just the tire iron version." He looked at me a long time in the dark. "I love you," he said, like it surprised him, like it had been sitting there for weeks waiting for an opening. "I have loved you since somewhere around the raccoon, and I've been terrified of it the entire time because loving someone in this world means you can lose them, and I really, really do not want to lose you." "I love you too," I said. "And I really, really do not want you to be the only one who gets to decide that's too scary to say out loud." It was all things considered a good night, which in hindsight, given how apocalypse stories tend to work, should have worried me a great deal more than it did. 3 days after Sam told me he loved me, the world decided to test whether we meant it. It started with the sound Walt had warned us about since day one and that none of us had ever actually heard. Not the shuffle of a handful of them, but something bigger, something with weight to it, moving down Main Street like weather. A herd, dozens of them, maybe more, pushed together by something none of us ever figured out, moving in the general direction of everything we had built. We had a plan for a lot of things. We did not have a plan for this. "Upstairs," Sam said, already moving, already shifting into the version of himself that took over in emergencies, the calm mask sliding back into place. Except this time I knew what was underneath it, and that knowledge didn't make him less capable. It just made me love him more, watching him hold steady for all of us while I knew exactly how much it cost him to do it. Storage room, the one with the reinforced door. "Now. Move." We moved. Walt got Milo up the stairs so fast the kid didn't have time to argue. Dana followed with the go bag we'd kept packed for exactly this scenario, and privately hoped we'd never need. I went last because someone had to hold the stairwell door, and the someone who volunteered before I even opened my mouth was Sam. "Go," he said. "We go together," I said. "I told you. Not the only reckless one. Josie, there is no version of this where I let you. You don't let me do anything," I said, already wedging a length of pipe against the door frame beside him, working fast. Hand steady despite everything in me screaming. "We're a team. That's the whole point of the last 2 months. You don't get to protect me by yourself. You get to protect me with me." He looked at me for exactly 1 second, One furious, terrified, entirely too fond second. And then, because there genuinely wasn't time to argue about it further, he nodded. And we held that door together side by side, exactly the way we'd fought in the stockroom doorway weeks before, moving like one animal instead of two, until the herd's momentum broke against a store that had, over 2 months, become genuinely, structurally, thoroughly ours to defend. It was close. I won't pretend it wasn't close. There was a moment, maybe 90 seconds long, where the door buckled and Sam threw his whole weight against it, and I thought, with total clarity, this might actually be it. This might be how it ends. And if it is, I am at least glad it's ending here with him, instead of anywhere else, with anyone else. But the door held. The pipe held. The herd eventually thinned and passed and moved on toward wherever herds go, drawn by some other noise, some other light, leaving Main Street quiet again in that particular ringing way that comes after something huge almost happens and doesn't. We sat in the stairwell afterward for a long time, not talking, just breathing, Sam's arm around my shoulders so tight it almost hurt. Both of us shaking with the specific aftershock that comes from having stared straight at the worst-case scenario and watched it, for once, decide not to happen. I meant what I said. He told me eventually, voice rough. About the team thing. About not doing this alone anymore. Good, I said. Because I wasn't planning on giving you a choice. Upstairs, we found Milo already turning the whole thing into a story. And then the herd was like this big, and Sam and Josie just held the line. With the enthusiastic embellishment of a teenager who had been scared out of his mind and was processing it the only way he knew how. Walt was quietly, methodically checking every lock in the storage room for the 3rd time, which I now understood, better than I had 2 months ago, was simply how his hands processed fear. And Dana looked at the two of us, disheveled and shaking and unmistakably still holding hands. And instead of her usual smugness, she just pulled us both into a hug that none of us objected to, and said into the general vicinity of my hair, "I'm really glad you're both still here." "Me too," I said, and meant it more than I had ever meant anything. The world had ended. It kept ending, actually, a little more every single day. But somewhere in the middle of it, in a hardware store, behind a barricade of paint cans and good intentions, with a locksmith who snored, a teenager who ate birthday candles, a best friend who ran an aggressive campaign of emotional honesty, and a personal trainer who fought like the apocalypse was a mild inconvenience and loved like it terrified him. I had found something I never expected to find at all. I had found a life worth defending. And I had found someone who thought I was worth defending it with. 1 year later, give or take. Here is where we ended up, for anyone keeping score. The hardware store is still ours, though it looks nothing like it did that first night. The windows are properly reinforced now, not just boarded, thanks to a very long argument between Walt and Sam about hinges that I stopped listening to somewhere around minute 10. We have a garden out back, in what used to be the parking lot, which Dana runs with the terrifying competence of a woman who has fully transitioned her medieval siege warfare knowledge into medieval siege warfare against aphids. Milo is 18 now, taller than Sam, which he will not let anyone forget, and still, against everyone's better judgment, deeply attached to that one comic book, which has been read so many times the pages have gone soft as fabric. Walt got remarried, if you can call it that when there's no longer anyone around to officiate, to a woman named Ruth from a settlement 2 towns over, who showed up trading batteries for seeds 1 week and simply never entirely left again. He is, if possible, even more insufferable about beige paint now that he has someone new to defend its honor to. And me? I married a man who once blocked my car with a tire iron and told me to get in his truck, in a ceremony that Dana officiated with a level of solemnity that suggested she'd been planning it since roughly the raccoon incident. Milo cried and then denied crying, and then cried again when nobody was looking, which I absolutely was looking, and have chosen not to mention to him directly out of mercy. Sam wore a suit jacket we'd found in a department store, 3 sizes too big through the shoulders because nothing fits him right off a rack, and when I walked up to him, down an aisle made of, appropriately, floor tile samples, he looked at me the exact way Dana once said he did, like I'd personally hung the moon, and I have decided, a year and some months into this marriage, that I am never, ever going to get tired of that look. We still argue about cilantro. He still checks the locks twice. I still carry Carol, though she's more ceremonial than necessary these days, since the herds have thinned and the world has gone quiet and strange in the way of things settling into a new normal instead of an old one. Most nights we sit by the window on watch anyway, not because we need to as much as we used to, but because it's become, somewhere along the way, just a thing we like doing together. An old habit from the worst months of our lives that turned, against every reasonable expectation, into one of the best parts of the good ones. Someone asked me recently, a newer arrival to the settlement, young, hopeful, still soft in the way people are before the world finishes rearranging them. Whether I thought there was any point in falling in love when everything could still, at any moment, fall apart. I thought about the gas station burrito I never got to eat. I thought about a tire iron and a paint mixer, and a raccoon with genuinely spectacular timing, and a stockroom doorway, and a door that buckled and held. I thought about Sam, asleep down the hall, one arm thrown over his eyes the exact way he always sleeps, still, even now, the calmest man I have ever met, except for the very specific nights he lets me see that he isn't. There's no other kind of point worth having, I told her. Everything can fall apart. It's going to eventually one way or another, apocalypse or no apocalypse. That was always true, we just didn't use to think about it so much. You can spend the time you've got waiting for a safer version of your life to start. Or you can just start it. With whoever makes you laugh in a storage room, or teaches your feral teenager how to throw a punch, or holds a door with you when the whole world is on the other side of it. She asked me if it was scary. Every single day, I said. Worth it every single time. Then I went inside because it was my turn to make dinner, and because somewhere in that hardware store a personal trainer, who fights like it's nothing and loves like it terrifies him, was almost certainly waiting up for me. The way he always does. The way, I have come to understand, he probably always will. Thanks for spending time with Flustered Novel. If this story made you laugh, blush, or scream at the characters, don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, and come back for more chaotic romance stories. See you in the next novel.